The screech of tires against asphalt tore through the still night air, the flashing red and blue lights growing closer. Marcus James's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he slowly pulled his car over to the side of the road. His mind raced with adrenaline. A million scenarios flooded his thoughts. Was it just a routine traffic stop? Or had something else been triggered? His heart pounded as he glanced into his rearview mirror, catching sight of the officer approaching with an air of unspoken authority. He took a deep breath and adjusted his posture. A familiar tension gripped his chest as he braced himself for what was coming. The officer, tall and broad-shouldered, approached his window with a deliberate calmness, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Good evening, sir," the officer said, his voice sharp. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Marcus's throat went dry. He had been careful. His license, registration, and insurance were all in order. He kept his hands visible on the wheel, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror, catching the reflection of another squad car pulling up behind him. "No, officer," Marcus responded, his voice steady but cautious. "Step out of the vehicle, please," the officer said, his tone growing colder, more authoritative. Marcus's pulse quickened. Something felt off. He had been stopped plenty of times in the past, but this felt different. The officer's eyes scanned him up and down, lingering a moment too long on Marcus's dark skin. He knew what this was about. He'd seen it before, heard the stories, how easy it was to be pulled over for no reason other than the color of his skin. Marcus hesitated for a moment, the knot in his stomach tightening. But he complied, stepping out of the car, his movements slow and deliberate. The cool night air hit him as he faced the officer. He could feel the other cop's eyes on him from behind. "I need you to turn around," the officer commanded, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "I'm arresting you for suspicion of impaired driving." "Impaired?" Marcus asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. He hadn't been drinking, hadn't been speeding, hadn't been doing anything wrong. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the reason for this sudden escalation. Why now? Why him? The officer remained silent, moving to cuff him. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, a deafening rhythm that drowned out the world around him. But just before the officer could tighten the cuffs, Marcus felt his hand slip into his jacket pocket, instinctively reaching for his badge. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly as he showed it to the officer. "FBI," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "I'm a Secret Service agent. This is a mistake." The officer's hands froze mid-motion. His gaze shifted from Marcus to the badge and back again, his expression faltering for just a fraction of a second. The tension in the air thickened, the officer's grip on his weapon tightening. For a moment, there was silence, a long, excruciating silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The second officer, who had been standing by the patrol car, stepped forward. His eyes scanned Marcus, then the badge. He could see the shift in his colleague's demeanor, the confusion, the uncertainty. A brief exchange of glances passed between them, and then something in the officer's face changed. The harshness softened, but it was too late to take back what had already happened. "You're telling me you're with the Secret Service?" the officer asked, his voice now laced with skepticism. Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yes. I'm on duty right now." "You've got the wrong person." The officer looked at the badge again, his mind racing, trying to process the information. I didn't know," he muttered under his breath, clearly flustered. He stepped back, his hand dropping from the cuffs. "I didn't know." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle in. The air felt thick with the unspoken reality of what had just transpired. The officer had nearly arrested him. Not because he was guilty of anything, but because of who he was and the assumptions that were made in a split second. Marcus's mind flashed back to his own training. He was no stranger to the systemic bias that plagued law enforcement, the assumptions that could lead to mistakes, to misunderstandings, to dangerous situations. But even now, knowing what he did about the way the world worked, it still hit hard. The very fact that he, a law enforcement officer himself, had to show his badge to avoid being treated like a criminal. It felt like a slap to the face. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer said, his voice hesitant but apologetic. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize." Marcus held up a hand, silencing the officer. "You didn't realize what?" "That I was a threat because of the color of my skin." The officer opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them stretched on, laden with the weight of years of systemic injustice, the long history of assumptions that had led to this moment. In the distance, a third squad car pulled up, its sirens fading as it came to a stop. 2 more officers emerged, looking confused. Marcus's eyes stayed focused on the officer in front of him. "I'm going to let you go," the officer said after a long pause, his tone shifting back to the professional calm he had started with. "You're free to go, Mr. James. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." But Marcus didn't move. He stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, the injustice, the bias that had nearly ruined everything. He wasn't just the victim of a traffic stop gone wrong. He was also a reminder of everything that was wrong with the system, how the color of a person's skin could lead to immediate suspicion, how people like him, despite wearing the same badge as these officers, could still be seen as a threat. The officer stepped back, clearly uncomfortable, unsure of what else to do. Marcus turned on his heel and walked back to his car without another word. He didn't need to say anything more. The moment, the truth, had already spoken for itself. As the car roared to life, Marcus's mind lingered on the intersection of identity, authority, and race. In that moment, he realized that the work of change was far from over. But it was moments like these, moments of painful truth, that would force others to see what they so often overlooked. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to begin shifting the tides of a broken system. As he drove off into the night, the flashing lights in his rearview mirror faded away, but the weight of the encounter remained, a reminder that justice was something to be fought for every day, in the smallest of moments, even when you were on the right side of the law. The engine of Marcus's car hummed softly as he drove through the quiet streets, the city lights casting long shadows over the pavement. His mind was still racing, but in a different direction now. The tension that had gripped his chest during the traffic stop slowly began to dissipate, but it was replaced by a bitter realization, a recognition that this wasn't a random incident, but a stark example of the larger, more pervasive issue that plagued not just the police force, but the entire system. He thought about the officer's face, the hesitation, the uncertainty, and that brief moment when the officer had to acknowledge the power imbalance between them. Marcus knew that it wasn't just about one officer making a mistake. It was about a systemic failure that had been entrenched for years, even decades. He had been close to becoming just another statistic, just another victim of a bias-riddled system. But he hadn't, and that didn't make it better, it made it worse. It made him wonder how many others hadn't been able to avoid that fate, how many others had been pulled over, arrested, or worse, simply because they didn't have a badge that could verify their identity. How many had been forgotten by the justice system because they didn't have the means to prove their innocence in a world so quick to assume the worst. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. He glanced down at the display, seeing a name that brought a flicker of warmth to his heart, Carmen, his partner. She had been with him through everything, from the grueling hours of training to the tension-filled moments like this one. They'd faced their share of difficulties together, but this was different. He answered the call. "Hey, Carmen. Marcus, are you okay?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge of concern in it. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, keeping his tone steady. "Just got pulled over. It was a mess." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I heard about it," she replied, her voice tight. "I've been on the phone with a few people. You know the department's going to have to do an internal review, right? This isn't just about one officer, this is bigger. Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened again. I know. But what can we do? It's the same thing every time, Carmen. Every time we think we're making progress, something like this happens. It feels like we're fighting an uphill battle. Carmen's voice softened, as if she could hear the exhaustion in his words. I know. But you're not alone in this, Marcus. And this incident could be the turning point. If we're going to change things, we have to make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. His lips pressed together in a thin line. I'll be okay, Carmen. I've been through worse. But what worries me is how many people don't get the chance to walk away like I did. There was a long silence, and then Carmen spoke, her words firm. We both know why it happened. And we both know the cost of silence. We can't let this go. Not anymore. Marcus looked out the window at the passing city streets, his mind shifting to the larger picture. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about the officer or the traffic stop. It was about a system that needed to be held accountable. One that he had dedicated his life to, but one that, at times, felt like it was working against him. He reached a stoplight and brought the car to a halt. The neon glow of a nearby store flickered in the night, casting its light over his car. He stared at the reflection of himself in the rearview mirror, seeing the exhaustion in his own eyes. I know, Carmen, he finally said, his voice quieter now. I know what we have to do. It's just going to take everything we've got. The line went quiet again, but this time there was something resolute in the silence, something stronger than before. Carmen's voice returned, steady and unwavering. We'll do it together, Marcus. You and me. As the call ended, Marcus leaned back in his seat, his thoughts swirling with both dread and determination. He knew the fight was far from over, and the consequences of pushing for change would be felt in every step he took from here on out. But he couldn't back down. Not when the stakes were this high. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. He unlocked the screen and opened it. The subject line read, Incident Review, Officer Involved, Urgent. His stomach sank. The email was from his supervisor. It was the formal review of what had happened during the traffic stop, and it had been flagged for immediate attention. The officer involved had already submitted his report, but Marcus knew how these things went. The message was blunt. We need you to submit your account of what transpired tonight. As a Secret Service agent, your credibility in this matter is crucial to our investigation. He typed out his response, his fingers steady despite the thoughts swirling in his head. I will provide a full and accurate report of the events. This matter cannot be overlooked. He sent the email and sat back in the car, staring into the dark night ahead. He knew this was just the beginning. His role in this investigation would be pivotal, but it would also place him in a dangerous position. The line between right and wrong wasn't always as clear as it should be, especially when the system itself was flawed. But Marcus was ready. Ready to fight for what was right, even if it meant going up against those within his own ranks. It wasn't about getting even, it was about ensuring that no one else had to go through what he did. It was about demanding accountability, not just for the officers who had failed him, but for the entire system that allowed such incidents to happen time and time again. He knew the road ahead would be long. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the fire of purpose burning inside him. The fight wasn't just his. It was everyone's who had been wronged by this system. And he was ready to lead the charge. The sound of Marcus's tires on the road seemed to drown out all other noise, his mind filled with the weight of the coming days. As much as he wanted to push everything aside and focus on the quiet, familiar hum of the drive, the reality of the situation pressed down on him harder than ever. He couldn't ignore it, this wasn't just about him. This wasn't a personal vendetta against one officer's mistake. This was about changing the narrative, challenging the assumptions that had been built into the very fabric of the system. The next morning came with a brutal clarity. The sunlight pierced through his blinds, throwing harsh beams across the room as he woke up, his mind already working through the next steps. Carmen had called early, her voice filled with determination as she briefed him on the strategies they would need to implement. The department, as expected, had already started their internal review. But this was bigger than an internal review. This was about taking the narrative beyond the walls of the precinct, beyond the carefully controlled reports, and into the hands of the public. The people needed to know. His phone rang again. This time, it was a familiar number, his boss, Chief Harris. Marcus took a deep breath and answered. "Marcus, I need you to come in." Now, Harris's voice came through, clipped and urgent. Marcus's pulse quickened, the familiar anxiety creeping back in. "What's going on?" "We've had some pressure from above," Harris said, his tone strained. "The review has escalated. There's a lot of attention on this. We need to talk in person." Marcus nodded, even though he knew Harris couldn't see him. "I'll be there in 20. The drive to the precinct was a blur, the streets slipping by in a haze as he tried to prepare himself mentally for whatever was waiting for him. As he parked his car outside the building, a crowd of reporters had gathered. He could see them with their cameras, their notepads, hungry for the story. The incident from the previous night had already started making headlines, but it hadn't quite exploded into the full-blown media frenzy he knew was coming. He had only just seen the first reports, but it was already clear that people were eager for answers. He pushed through the door, ignoring the curious eyes of the officers in the hallway. Inside, Chief Harris was sitting at his desk, a stack of files in front of him, his expression hard to read. "Marcus," Harris said, gesturing for him to sit. "We need to talk about what happened." Marcus sat, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I've already given my statement. I don't know what else there is to say." The officer made a mistake. "That's the issue," Harris said, his voice low. "It wasn't just one mistake. It's systemic, Marcus. This is the kind of thing that happens over and over again, and now we've got the media breathing down our necks. They're calling it racial profiling. They're calling it bias. And they want answers." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "You can't just sweep this under the rug. The truth needs to come out. If we don't acknowledge this, nothing changes." Harris pinched the bridge of his nose, frustration flashing across his face. "I know that. But we need to be strategic here. We can't afford to make a wrong move." The tension in the room grew thick as the weight of their conversation settled over them. Marcus knew that Harris wasn't just concerned about the integrity of the department, he was concerned about the political fallout. The department could weather a storm, but there was a line between handling this properly and damaging their reputation permanently. The pressure was mounting on both sides, public opinion and internal politics. And Harris's discomfort was palpable. "Marcus, I'm giving you two options. We can handle this internally, minimize the damage, and release a statement of regret. It'll buy us time to handle the fallout. Or, we can go public with a full accountability strategy, admitting there was a problem and making real changes. But if we do that, it won't just be the department under fire. It'll be you, too." Marcus stared at Harris, his mind working furiously. He had expected something like this. An attempt to keep things under control, to keep everything behind closed doors. But Marcus couldn't let this go. "I'm not playing that game," Marcus said, his voice sharp with resolve. "You're asking me to protect a system that has failed us. You're asking me to stay quiet while people like me, like everyone in the community, continue to be unfairly targeted. No. If we want things to change, we need to be the ones leading that change." Harris's gaze hardened, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, perhaps respect, or perhaps fear. "You realize this is bigger than just your incident, right? This could spiral. And once it does, there's no going back. Marcus stood up, his resolve firm. I know the stakes. And I'm ready for them. He turned toward the door, his hand on the handle. I'll go public. It's the only way this will matter. It's the only way anything changes. Marcus left the precinct that day knowing his life had just shifted. The decision he'd made wasn't one he could easily undo. It was a call to action, a declaration that he was no longer willing to stand on the sidelines of a broken system. He'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. The media storm that followed was relentless. News outlets pounced on the story with vigor, dissecting every detail, debating every nuance. But through the chaos, Marcus's message came through clear. This wasn't just about him. This was about everyone who had been forced to live in a system that treated them as less than. He became the face of a movement, a reluctant leader, but a leader nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, protests erupted across the city. People, tired of the status quo, rallied behind Marcus's words. It wasn't just a push for reform in one precinct. It was a call for national change. And as the media continued to buzz with the fallout, Marcus knew that it was just the beginning of a much larger battle, a battle that would require not just one person's courage, but the collective strength of an entire community. As he stood at the front of a crowd one evening, speaking out against injustice, Marcus realized something he hadn't expected. The fight wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be messy, complicated, and long. But it was a fight worth having. The stakes were higher than ever. And for the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of what it meant to stand up for what was right. And he was ready to keep fighting. The weeks that followed were a blur of protest marches, heated debates, and media attention. Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight, a reluctant symbol of resistance. The weight of responsibility bore down on him as he met with community leaders, activists, and lawmakers, all while trying to maintain his integrity in a system that was not designed for people like him to succeed. Despite the overwhelming pressure, Marcus felt a deep sense of purpose. His message was clear, resonating with so many who had faced the same biases, the same systemic injustice. But the more the movement grew, the more resistance he faced from within his own department. Some officers, who had once been colleagues, distanced themselves. The division within law enforcement deepened as some stood in solidarity with Marcus's mission, while others saw his actions as a betrayal of the badge they all wore. One evening, as he was leaving a community meeting, Marcus received a call from Carmen. Her voice was strained, filled with urgency. Marcus, you need to hear this. The department's about to take action. They're considering disciplinary measures for you. You're not the only one affected by this. The fallout's starting to ripple through the ranks. Marcus clenched his jaw, a mixture of anger and resolve flooding through him. What are they going to do? I don't know yet, but it's serious. You might be facing suspension, or worse. The media's been relentless. They're calling for your resignation, claiming you've divided the department. Marcus took a moment to process it. He knew this day might come, but that didn't make it any easier to stomach. I've come too far to turn back now. If they want to discipline me, they'll have to do it publicly. I'm not backing down. The conversation ended with Carmen's words lingering in the air, I'm proud of you, Marcus. You're doing the right thing. Just know that you're not alone. Days later, the disciplinary hearing took place. Marcus stood before a room full of senior officers, administrators, and a handful of community leaders who had come to support him. He felt the weight of every eye on him, their judgment, their skepticism, and, in some cases, their fear of the change he represented. The room fell silent as the head of internal affairs addressed him. Officer James, we've reviewed the incident that took place during the traffic stop. You've caused a disruption, both inside this department and in the community at large. Some believe your actions were justified, but others see them as insubordination. The question is, do you still believe that your actions were in the best interest of this department, given the fallout? Marcus stood tall, his back straight. His voice, calm and steady, echoed in the tense room. I believe that what happened that night was a symptom of a much larger issue. And I'm not going to apologize for holding up a mirror to this department. If we can't face our own biases and injustices, how can we be trusted to protect the communities we serve? The people who look like me don't just deserve justice, they deserve dignity. And I'll continue to fight for that, whether you support me or not. There was a long silence after his statement. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the decision that would change everything. Finally, the head of internal affairs nodded slowly. Your actions have brought to light issues that we can no longer ignore. But that doesn't change the fact that your position as a law enforcement officer has been compromised. We will be suspending you for 30 days. During that time, we will work on a community outreach initiative that you will be leading. It's time to repair the relationship between the police and the communities we serve. Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but it wasn't the relief he had expected. The suspension stung, but it was the first step in the long journey toward healing the rift. The department had acknowledged the need for change, albeit reluctantly, but at least they were taking a step in the right direction. As Marcus left the building that day, a sense of calm washed over him. His actions had not only sparked change within the department but had also ignited a conversation on a national scale. He wasn't naive enough to think that the battle was over. He knew that the real work was just beginning. But for the first time, he felt hopeful. He felt as though his fight had purpose, and that purpose was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Marcus's story didn't end with the suspension. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where he led the charge for real reform. The community outreach initiative he led became a cornerstone of police reform, with a focus on education, accountability, and creating a bridge between law enforcement and the communities they were meant to protect. Though there were setbacks along the way, resistance from those who wanted things to stay the same, Marcus pressed on. His name became synonymous with change, and slowly, the conversation about police bias, systemic injustice, and accountability grew louder. Years later, Marcus stood on the steps of the courthouse, looking out at a crowd of people who had come together for a rally in support of ongoing police reform. The movement he had started had gained momentum, and it was clear that his fight had touched lives far beyond his own. As he took the microphone, his voice steady, the words came to him naturally. We've come a long way, but we're not done yet, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. This isn't about one man, one mistake, or one department. This is about all of us. And as long as there is injustice, as long as there is inequality, we will keep fighting. Together. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices united in solidarity. Marcus smiled, knowing that the work was far from over, but that the path ahead was brighter. He had made a difference. Not just in the department, but in the world. And for the first time in his life, he knew that the fight for justice was worth every step. Because change, no matter how long it took, was always possible. And Marcus had seen it happen with his own eyes.